part of his life, part of our family, and part of his family. And coming here today, thank you on behalf of all of us for sharing your time, your precious time. When Glenn died, Glenn and I had a chance to speak with him the week before he died. And then he was lucid. It was really a great conversation. He talked then about he loved his faith. He did. Father got it right, spot on today, that he cared so much. He had some issues with in some of his life with the church, but he loved his faith and he loved his Catholic faith. So I did put together some thoughts, and what I encourage you to do is when I'm done, Joe did a great job of the eulogy. I want to thank Joe. I want to thank the readers, Mallory, David, and Luke, and Joshua, and help with all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren that brought the gifts up. That was wonderful. Glenn would have loved that. He had a special heart, place in his heart for people who were poor. And so that offertory of the gifts that we will give to their outreach here at Holy Redeemer was valuable. So these are just about 3 or 4 minutes worth of ideas and my feelings about Glenn. And then I would welcome people to come up if they have a story to share. You know, Jerry Grander played ball with him, for goodness sakes, and Jerry's here back in 1988 and that whole time. It'd be great if Jerry would share a story, but if you're so we'd love to hear from you. So these are the thoughts. Glenn was slow walking, sometimes fast talking, but always curious and a devoted listener. His gait was paced, but his gifts were great. Glenn showed up for life. You just never knew when he would appear with ideas and recommendations to solve all the world's problems. Most of us just had a hard time keeping up with him. He was an amazing person, perfect in God's eyes for the plan that God laid out for Glenn. He was a man of great intelligence. Glenn had a master's degree, but humble as a shepherd. He would listen intently, be confirming, and treat everyone as if they were the most important person in the world. Glenn had a great compassion for all. He was comfortable in his own skin, with his own self. Glenn had a hard life. He was chased by demons that were not of his own making. He fought off resentments when harmed because it hindered the joy and vitality that our hearts need to love. In the end, Glenn was forgiving because it was a path to true healing, to begin anew as he understood God's greatest commandment, to love our God, our family, our friends, and our neighbor. He always had tender hellos and goodbyes. He could light up a room with his enthusiasm, and he was a teacher at heart. Glenn listened and appreciated life in the wind and the waves and in the painful cries of people he cared for. He shared in our joy and happiness, our worries, and helped us to understand the deeper meanings of our own worries, failures, and successes. He was a global thinker, but just a local Michigander at heart. He had a tender love for so many of us to help overcome our pain and impatience when our souls were suffering. Glenn was a combination of Einstein and Forrest Gump. Leaping for joy at seeing a friend and yearning to teach. He was a sponge for ideas, learning, and solutions. Nothing was too trivial for Glenn. He was willing to forgive those who didn't deserve it and soldiered on through sickness and disappointments and anxiety and burdens and bereavement. Glenn triumphed over death because he shared Jesus' cross and suffering in so many ways. I know God welcomed him at the gates of heaven with open arms, love, and answers. He's a mom and dad and friends, all his family and relatives who he cared deeply for, honored, wondered about, and was so curious and caring about them. Glenn waits for us now, and I can just see him walking slowly with Jesus, encouraging him to lighten our burden. He walked like a shepherd and had a great sense of humor. Can't you just see him throwing his head back in laughter and is clapping his hands and smiling with his eyes? When I was trying to reach Joe after Glenn died, I called Beth's sister Sue to have her check to see if Joe was home. A man answered the phone who Atlanta and I thought was her brother David. We had a bad connection. I had difficulty understanding and kept telling him to let me speak to Sue because my brother had died and it was important for Joe to know that right away. I must have repeated it 3 times before the man spoke clearly enough to tell me that I was calling his Marathon gas station.
I was going to say, I don't remember.
And I know Glenn would tell me that he was proud of my effort to inform everyone, especially the Marathon man. There were many people in Glenn's life who tried to help and carry him in tough times and understanding his pain. I want to especially thank Sue Isbell, Glenn's lifelong beloved friend, for all of her care and love for Glenn. She was always there for him during the very difficult times when his family could not be. And David is here with a family from the Isbell family, and I so appreciate you coming. I know you're so much part of Glenn's life. Glenn suffered greatly from a world that had trouble understanding and helping him. I tell you, however noble and right it seemed at the time, it's hard to see how electric shock and forced water therapy could have helped Glenn comprehend the world any better. But he coped, he studied, reflected, and found a way to keep moving away from those who could hurt him to a place where he could heal, be heard, understood, and loved. Glenn had to be a taker and expert user of the support and medical help that he so desperately needed and depended upon. But he was a giver in so many ways. Mother Teresa said, "You cannot give what you do not have." Glenn gave heartfelt compassion, his precious time, his caring, understanding, empathy, and love because he had it to give. Now at his journey's end, Glenn's vessel of ashes and remains will return to its native earth. The precious treasure of Glenn's spirit that his body sheltered and held is presented into the saving hands of God. The last time I saw Glenn, he told me, as I said before, that he loved his Catholic faith, and after so many years had come to a forgiving place in his life. Glenn emptied himself of possessions because that's not what drove him. He uncluttered his life by removing any self-preoccupation with things that seemed needed, but they were just stuff. And that's all just on loan from God anyway. I'm almost done. Glenn was a prolific writer who chose poetry and prose over the pulpit. Joe gave you an example of how he wrote and thought. And David said he was not a linear speaker. He spoke in circles. He once pursued the pulpit in the Catholic seminary, reaching the level of major seminaries, and his writings may not have appeared on the list of bestsellers, but his insightful and penetrating ideas had a profound effect on many of us. He was a voracious reader and researcher of ideas to help people, to make a difference. Glenn eventually learned to spend less time on the internet and more time listening to us and music, walking outdoors, laughing with friends and family. Faith is a way of seeing things. Glenn saw the beauty of God in the wonders of brooks and trees, the warming sun, the painted clouds, the fresh water that we completely depend on and falls right out of the sky to us, the innocence of a child's eyes. This is where Glenn saw and heard God. And believe it or not, Glenn had great hunting skills. He could shoot a bow and arrow like Robin Hood. He was so good at it that he shot his own brother in the leg, running past the garage door at 50 yards, and unbelievably persuaded me not to tell Dad and Mom about it. At the end of the day, we love you, Glenn, and we'll miss you until we meet again at that big party in the sky. I wait to feel your open arms, that great big bear hug again. So thank you. I would invite you all to come on up. share a story or two. Joe did a great job with the eulogy. If you have anything else to say, please do that. And thank you. And like Joe says, pat yourself on the back. Give yourself a hand for coming. Thank you all. You want to come up, Bob?
I would like to ask, all right, you want me to go up there?
Yeah, come on up.
So everybody can hear your great wisdom words.
For those of you that don't know me, my closest relation to you is the fact that I was in the car with Glenn that fateful night in, when did you tell me? 53?
54.
54. That was a very sad event in both of our lives, and I'm so happy to be here tonight, or today, to see how wonderful Glenn's life turned out. It's just amazing what a wonderful, wonderful family the Zelleys have. It's got to be the biggest family I've ever heard of. In fact, I was suggested to somebody that you might want to think about maybe a new country. The country of Zelley. Have you been to Zelley? But I certainly have been to Zelley. And I love you all. I think you've got a wonderful, wonderful family. Glenn, hang in there, baby. I'm coming soon, as are the rest of us. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, that's great. Please, yeah, come on up. Thank you. Just introduce yourself.
My name's Miranda. Sue is my aunt. Uncle James was my uncle my whole life. I actually didn't even know his name wasn't James until I was in my mid-20s. Most people, what bothered me was they didn't understand my uncle, and I couldn't understand why. Why don't you understand his gibberish and his oddness and his life? Just, he's so full of life. I don't ever remember him being angry or less than happy. 2 weeks ago, I got to have one of the best luncheons I've ever had with him. We went out to eat, and it was so amazing to listen to him talk about how he was praying for somebody else who was ill, and he never asked anything for himself. Not in the entire time I ever knew him. He was a great friend and confidant. Even when they were gone long distances, when they lived up north, we never lost touch, and every time we would see each other, it was like a day never went by. And that was the best thing about my Uncle James was the phrase, "Hey kiddo, how you doing?" And I love it, I love it, I love it. It was never one, I love it, by golly, it was always three. 3 in a row. I love it, I love it, I love it. You could talk about dog poop who just stepped in the park, and he would seriously just love it, love it, love it. Because to him, that was an event. Everything was an event. He was there through both births of my children, and I am very blessed that my son and he got to have a very good relationship, and he got to spend the last, about a week ago, he spent a week up there with him, and I'll always be thankful for that. So I'm glad that you guys invited us here to celebrate James's life, because this is not a goodbye. This could never be a goodbye. This is just a moment without him. And the next time I see him, I'm sure the first thing he's going to say is, "Hey, kiddo!" So thank you all.
David, great. Thank you.
I'm Dave. I'm her big brother, and like her, I didn't know this Glenn guy. I knew James, and I'm sitting there thinking only one story. I can't have one story. And then I'm thinking, well, how about a story that's not inappropriate to tell? And I'm having a hard time finding one of those too. I just want to say that I was very, very fortunate to know this man that was my friend, mentor, uncle. And he was a bit of an enigma. I was telling somebody the other day about all of his struggles and all the things he did in his life, and somebody said, "Is he a cat?" He just had so many lives, and to not stand up here and blabber, there's two stories that I want to tell you that you may not know. One of them you won't know because it's mine. Well, actually, both of them are mine. But so when I was probably, I don't know, 9 years old or something, you know how he used to teach older people how to use computers, right? And so probably this is the 80s when the monitors were this big, but the screen size was that big. He took me to his classroom on a couple of occasions, and he made me the assistant teacher. I knew like how to turn the things on at that time, but he had me helping these senior citizens to work their mouse. I'm not even sure they had a mouse. We had Control-Alt keys or something like that. I don't remember, but I remember he had me teaching these things. And this is the thing about James. The way he dealt with children is he treated them like adults. And that was so rare. He did that with all of my kids. He would just ask, "Hey, what's going on? And tell me your story." And he would just listen all the time. And so it was hard for me to know him because he never wanted to talk about himself. He always wanted to hear about everything that I was, I'd ask him about himself, and he'd flip it right back on me all the time. And that's just how he was. But I was fortunate to take his last road trip. Actually, my son Caleb here was on his last road trip, but that one doesn't count because James was the passenger and, he liked to drive. I was fortunate to go on his last road trip where he drove. He drove me from Grayling to Charlevoix. And my aunt had a swear jar, so every time he would swear, he'd have to put money in. And so I kind of tricked him because he was driving, and I won't tell you all the stories that he told me, we'd be here all day, but I basically tricked him into giving me a linear account of his life. As we're taking a tour around all these places that he grew up around and all these things that he showed me, I got him to tell me a chronology, which was impossible because all my life I was trying to figure this stuff out, when these things happened. And he told me things, how they happened in his life. And I was just blown away because there were things that I didn't know about. But I tell you about the swear jar because the time we came back, she could have made easily a couple mortgage payments. And I think it was he was finally unwinding and making peace with all of these things that had happened to him. And he found a way to forgive. And that was just...
Okay to cry. You got lots of napkins around you, Mike.
It was just amazing to be a part of that because I think he needed that ride. And thank you.
It's okay to cry, man. Thank you.
And I was just blessed to be there, to be the one to take that trip, for him to say goodbye. I won't tell you what he did to his mother's grave, but Mike knows. You can ask him. But it was a good time. It was a good trip. And it was a good way to say goodbye. And I'm also very fortunate because I talked to him the last time he ever talked on the phone. It was with me, and that was just happenstance because I wanted to call to see how he's doing. And when we were talking as he's falling asleep, he's telling me these things that were great, organized thoughts in detail. I'm like, what is going on? It's supposed to be important. So I was in the car, I pulled over to write stuff down because, he never gave like organization or details. He just didn't. So this is important. I should write this down. And one of the last things that he said, we were talking about my daughter. I don't know where she is. That one right there, my 7-year-old. He was talking to me about her, and he always had a special place in his heart for my kids. And she knew that he was sick, and she didn't get a chance to say goodbye, so he wrote her a note, and he said, "I was thinking of you. I thought you were a great kid." So last thing he wrote in his journal, where he kept every thought. So it's jumbled, his journals, just like all of his thoughts, but it was so precious to be able to see that in his own handwritings as he was falling asleep. And you may not know this, but that wasn't his last note. As he was put to sleep by my aunt last night, he got up in the middle of the night sometime, and he wrote on a little whiteboard, "Sue equals love." And what a gift to my aunt, who spent 30 years in this deep friendship that was really hard for some of us to be able to explain and understand, but how awesome to have a friend like that. And like Miranda said, I think, this is just the beginning for him, and I'm grateful that he was here during this part of my life, and I'm grateful that I know where he is, and I'm going to see him again. So, thank you for your lives and sharing in his.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I knew Glenn at Michigan State. I was there with 3 or 4 classes with him, and I didn't know that he was related to you guys. He said, "Oh, he's from up in the Grayling or someplace." I said, "Gee, there's so long we used to go, and I've commuted from here to Michigan State." And then I graduated, and I never thought of him again until I saw the thing in the paper. So I don't really know any of you people except Mike here and Lana, but I just came to pay my respect. I'm Tom McGee from Red Blank, and I'm a teacher. I teach in the Flint School, mostly in Skill Center, and at Southwestern and Northern. I teach learning disabled math, and they call me all the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Very nice.
I'll get help from my wife after this is all over, but
You can pull it up.
can you? There you go. Is it on?
Yeah.
My name is Jerry Grantner. I went to school with Glenn. And the Glenn that I know is not Glenn James. It's Glenn O. I had to ask Mike. Glenn wouldn't tell you what the O stands for. All those years, and we'd ask him, and we guessed. Oliver, Oscar, Oswald, didn't know. Glenn Oakley. That's a family name. If Glenn was here today, which he is in spirit, he would say, excuse me, the only reason you're here is to see if this hall stinks.
No locker room.
And the reason is, that was our old locker room down there on the end. We had a lot of fun here. My first memory of Glenn, some of us got invited over to Bruce Street. And we got to go over to the Regal Funeral Home, go downstairs where the caskets were, and play hide and go seek down there. And for us kids, that was really a big thing. Later on, as you heard, Zelley's moved to the north end. And I can remember, Glenn had a hinky laugh, kind of a hee. He couldn't wait to tell me. It was Halloween day. Halloween was that night. And here come the paper boy to collect. And he had his bag on, one over the one shoulder on this one hip and one on the other hip. one of the attendants had a really nasty looking mask. And the kid was there to get his money while the one attendant's, come on in, come on in. Well, the other guy was hiding in one of the viewing room right off the foyer. He got as far as just poking his head in and the guy jumped out. Glenn said, according to the attendant, the kid just exploded out of his paper bag. Papers went everywhere. They chased him. I don't know how far south you were, Pearson Road, but Glenn said they run him for 2 blocks before they finally caught him. And then had to help the guy put his papers back together and pay him. The father got it right. We felt, and maybe it's egotistical, I don't know, we had a special class, a good bunch of athletes, and when they opened the doors in '46, we started. I got the yearbook out last night because I was looking for a quote. 29 of us were what was called lifers. We started in '46, graduated in '58. We were the 3rd class, but the first one to go all the way through. And Glenn was a part of that. This school was the newest school in the old parochial league. And we had no identity, no tradition. St. Mike's was the big daddy. St. Matt's. These are old established schools, and believe me, it's hard to establish an identity when you've never won. Glenn was all a part of this, and it wasn't just the team. It was the parents, the faculty, the good sisters. We all wanted to win. Excuse me. And Dick Clark, get kind of emotional about this. Good. He remembered seeing Glenn walk every night from here down to the bus station, which was at Fenton and Hill, to catch the bus to go home. Now, when you think about that, that's dedication, because we had to be in school at 8 o'clock. We were out at 3:30, on the field at 4, dressed and practiced, out at 6, a shower, and then Dick Clark said he always remembered Glenn carrying his duffel bag, walking down to the corner to catch the bus to go home. And Dick always said that was my kind of guy. Glenn was part of a great family here. The Holy Redeemer Flyers laid down a pretty damn good foundation. When we were juniors, I was telling somebody earlier, there were no seniors on the basketball team. Holy Redeemer won his first trophy, holiday tournament. Then they won the CPL championship, City Parochial League that year, no seniors. Baseball team followed up. We had 1 senior on the team, Donnie Miller. All the rest of us were underclassmen. They won the championship. That fall when we were seniors, steamrolled everybody. In fact, Bill Walbert, our all-state halfback, sat next to me and he said, you know, Granny, I don't think we're going to get a letter this year. And I said, what do you mean? He said, Clark is only letting us play part of the first quarter and we sit the bench the rest of the time. That was a good thing because everybody got to play. That's how loaded we were. So we go undefeated in football. Then the basketball team picked up from where they went last year. They won 33 straight games. We're the City Parochial League champions. Glenn was all a part of this. And he was really a good guy. As I said, you got it right. He was smart. He was liked by everybody. I don't think I ever heard anybody say a bad thing about Glenn Zelley. He's a good man. Anyway, just want to tell you a little bit about what his life was before he was Glenn James. He was our friend, and he was one of the good guys. Thank you. I'll get help from my wife about this too. I do know a little bit about disabilities, both personally and professionally. And when a person acquires a disability, premorbid personality is a big thing. Who you were before the accident or injury plays a big role in who you are afterwards. And the only one that I know, the Bible, St. Paul, who was a persecutor, got struck by lightning and suddenly now he becomes a Christian and all that. That rarely happens. If you're an SOB before you get hurt, good chance you're an SOB afterwards. And I'd like to think that Glenn and all of us that knew him, the parents, all played a role in his premorbid personality which allowed him to function as he did after the accident. It's remarkable that he did what he did. Bachelor's degree, master's degree, Michigan State, of course. Where else? And he really, I think he really did well. So I think we all had a part in his life, and who he was. To this day, I think if your mom and dad were here, they could go over to the school there and point to bricks that they helped pay for to put in that school. This was, you know, they called us farmers because we were the southernmost school. We were not in the city of Flint, and I had to have one of the cheerleaders tell me that we were being insulted because I lived out of town and my friends were farmers, for crying out loud. So it's one final little anecdote. The year we were seniors, we're playing down to Atwood Stadium, we're unbeaten, and we're playing for the championship, and that was the only time, I think, Garnet could correct me if I'm wrong, it's the only time we were ever behind at halftime. We were behind 13-12. And Father Kavanaugh got a little carried away with himself, and he got up in the press box at Atwood Stadium, and he invited all the people from Holy Redeemer to come to the big homecoming dance at St. John Vianney to celebrate their big homecoming victory. Well, somebody comes running in the locker room, told us about it. The roof fell in, the final score was 38-19. The farmers kind of plowed them under. and you know, one other thing I was thinking about, going to a parochial school probably was pretty much the same wherever you went. We all had seat assignments, and usually it was alphabetically. And Glenn, being Zelley, was the last one. We had a young priest come here, associate, for 1 year, Father Utra. And I don't know whose idea, he's young, fresh out of the seminary, I don't know whose idea it was. But when he called roll, nobody said here or present. They just said chop. And so it went down the room, chop, chop, chop. When it came to Zelley, he hollers, timber! Oh. Father didn't appreciate that too good. And you know what, one final one, Joyce, now she's waving me, shut up. I ran into a guy from St. Michael's, an older guy, pretty good athlete, Jerry Owens. He's passed on now. And he found out that I went to Holy Redeemer, and he says, hey, Jerry, he said, do you remember how we all, we had to sit in the same seats and alphabetically and all that? And I said, oh, yeah. He says, one time at St. Mike's, he said, I was in the 7th grade. Monsignor Earl Sheridan was the pastor there. And of course, when the pastor came into the school, and the kids were out in the hall, good morning, Father, good morning, Father, good morning, Monsignor, whatever. Well, Jerry Owens saw Monsignor Sheridan coming across the street into the church, into the school, and he whacked the guy in front of him, his buddy Frankie, and he said, Frank, shape up, the Earl is coming. Well, behind his back, they called the Monsignor Earl Sheridan. The Earl's coming. So the bell rings, they dismiss, and they're out in the hallway, and sure enough, there's a Monsignor standing there. Everybody's walking by, good morning, Monsignor, good morning, Monsignor. Frankie walks by and says, good morning, Earl. He grabbed him by the shirt and he said, what did you call me? Jerry said, I just sort of slid right by him laughing out the door he went. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. Glenn was one of the good guys. He was our guy.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn it on. Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Oh,
Can
right.
now.
All right, I'm not real loud, so I need this. I'm Michael Zelley, son of Mike Zelley, James Zelley. It goes by Mike. I guess there's a lot of that. Zelley. I just wanted to share something really quick when I was kind of watching the videos and everything. And, it'll go a little roundabout, but it'll come back, I promise, and it'll be quick. There's a theory out there in psychology and in just kind of mental behavior, talking about mental health issues, and it's that in order to evolve, when we evolved through evolution, we had to learn to lie. That's part of what makes us who we are. Our brains are advanced, so we learn to lie. And part of it was that we had to learn to lie to ourselves. You know, things like confidence and I can do this when everything in you tells you that you can't. And there's another theory that those with mental illnesses lose the ability to lie to themselves, so that they actually live a truly genuine life. They're not lying to themselves anymore. And life is not easy, and it's hard, and there are barriers, and you overcome them, and you experience it as genuinely as possible. And just watching this, and obviously Glenn has some mental health issues, and there's probably a negative stigma attached to it that he probably suffered with some things. And it was probably just this great gift that was given to him, that he was able to experience life unlike any of the rest of us will ever experience it. And these moments where he's smiling, and it's a truly genuine smile, are the moments that you talked about with your daughter in the notes. These are truly genuine human moments that we're experiencing in the absolute, complete way that a human should experience them. So just looking at the videos and listening to everything that everybody said, you probably lived a much fuller life than all of us will ever experience. And it was pretty amazing. That's all.
Thank you.
Turn on.
I'm Dora. I'm David Jr.'s wife. And this is kind of funny story outward for most of you. But I think it really describes who Uncle Jim was. I dated my husband for probably 8 months before we decided to be married. Well, this is before we got to know each other. We were engaged for a month. We were married. So he's told that Israel women in the family were a little worried about me. Understandable. I'm from Mexico, I'm from another country. So I remember the first Thanksgiving, I go to the Israel's house to meet my fiance's family. And I get out of the car to get my jacket. And then this guy that I just hardly could understand comes and says, I have a bunch of women driving me nuts in that house. I mean, you tell me, are you marrying him for the papers? In that, I think I was a little bit naive. I'm not quite sure if I understood exactly what he said at the time. And just looking at his face, his big smile, and his bright eyes full of light. Are you marrying him for the papers? I didn't slap his face. But I think only James would have been able to get along with that. He was a great man. He was a great mentor for my husband, for my sons, for my nephew. I had so many kind of rides with him, and it was just to see the life through his eyes, to enjoy nature with him through his eyes. It was just beautiful. I remember another time having my older daughter. They played for an hour and a half in a very Barbie tent in Sue's living room. Laughing, and James, he was a big man, just getting himself into a little tiny Barbie tent. And it was just precious to me. So he was just a blessing for our home. He was really a blessing for our family.
Thank you.
Okay, those were heartfelt stories. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the Isbell family for coming. It was so part of Glenn's life. Like I said, there was a life and an afterlife almost, and now there'll be a big party in the sky, and we'll get to see him again. But it's been very helpful to all of you. It's been helpful to our family to hear these beautiful stories about Glenn. And the one last thing that isn't how funny God has a sense of humor, I think, of how things come around, that we actually found out that my oldest granddaughter, Amber, and her close friend is a grandson of a woman who graduated from Glen High School right here at Holy Redeemer. My goodness, how things come around, don't they? It's a small world. And yet, Glenn made it a bigger world for all of us. So thank you all for coming. There's probably extra desserts if you want it. It was a beautiful thing, and we might turn this on one more time. But thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah.
I might need some help
Well, maybe.